Hi, thanks for joining me today. I have here the second advent calendar that I made, and I think in total I'm aiming to make five this year as gifts. So while I don't have a full-on tutorial for how to make these advent folios, uh, if there's any interest, I can shoot a tutorial because I do have to make some more. But this one is going to be it's not completely finished on the cover, but it's nearly there. So I figured I would show it, and in my photos on the blog post, you'll see the final version with the cover all nicely decorated. The measurements for this are 6.5 wide by 8.5 tall. So it is smaller than the other advent calendar folio that I showed. And this is what the spine looks like. This spine is wider though than the previous one. And then the back cover. Pretty simple, but what I like about it is that it kind of, this would be tied, but I left it untied just so that it would be easy to show. But what I like is that it really kind of looks like it's a book, like a really thick book, but a book. So you can open this up, and then you have your 24 boxes, nicely numbered. Oh, I didn't realize I have 4 reds in a row here. Okay, had I to do it over again, I would probably mix this up a little bit more. But anyways, so this one's a little bit different from the previous one that I showed, primarily because the box construction is very different. So these boxes have lids that are attached, and there's just a little thumb notch or finger notch in the lid that you can just put your finger in, open it up, and then inside would be your little sweet treat, or I guess Bible verses is another common thing to put in there. But I'm thinking of, just my initial thought is to have a mix of candy, maybe some sort of fortune cookie-esque sayings, maybe jokes, seasonal jokes, Bible verses, just mix it up a little bit so that each day is a little bit something different and it's not all about candy. But the box construction is really different. It's much smaller of a book altogether, and the fact that the boxes are created this way, they're able to kind of all be tucked in and touching each other, so that that's how you can get it so small and flush. But then also I'm able to have this sort of decorative paper on the outside, which is just a gold pearlescent cardstock, and that's what gives me the sort of gold gilded page look to it. So I'm a little torn as to which I like better, but I do think it's a pretty neat construction. The only thing that I will definitely do this over again, because I do think that I can do a better job of making the boxes a little bit neater, so that, see how there's some uneven edges, and so there's a little bit of white poking up above the gold. So I do think that I can probably neaten up those edges a little bit, just so that it's on the bottom you can really notice. Although I guess people won't really be looking at it from this angle, but still, I think next time I'll pay a little closer attention to that. I was sort of just making this up as I went along, and so the idea to put the gold accent strips along the side came like after the fact. And so now that I see this fully constructed, I definitely have a better idea for next time how to get everything a lot more flush, a lot more clean, so that the edges are look just a little bit more professional. But I think it's still a really nice gift, and it turned out really well. So I'm pretty happy with it. The other notable difference in making this one is just the box construction, the amount of designer paper or pattern paper that you would need is significantly less than the previous advent calendar that I showed. And I'll show you in a second here how to make this box, and you'll see why. At the end, I'll compare the two boxes so that it's a little bit of a recap of the first one, but then you can kind of see the pros and cons of each of the different style of boxes. But yeah, so that's this. The other idea that I had that would work for both boxes is possibly printing out photos of family members of the family that's receiving the advent calendar, and then putting it at the bottom of the box. So for example, if this was going to my brother and who has 3 sons, I could put photos of his 3 kids, his wife, himself, just on different days. And maybe those are the days that have like the little sweet treat. And so kind of be an indicator that that's the person who's meant to have that piece of candy that day. So, and it's kind of cute. You open it up and you kind of see, your own face in there, I think would be really fun. And so that's one idea. The other idea was for, and I think that would be particularly fun with the kids. So maybe it's just the kids, because I know the kids will probably want the candy more than the parents would. So that's one idea. The other idea I had was, since we are gifting this one each to my grandmother-in-laws, possibly having photos of the rest of the family. So, my husband and I, our dogs, and maybe asking the rest of the family to kind of send us photos, and then just printing out little 2x2 photos so that, they can kind of see, throughout the month of December, a little photo of the family. And it's just something that's a little bit of a surprise, a little bit fun, and I don't know if I'll necessarily be making these each year and giving them each year, but if I did, that would be a really fun way to just kind of see everybody as the years go by. It almost becomes a little mini album in a way. So that's that. Let me go ahead and set this aside, and I'll show you how to make the box. Okay, so for this style box, I actually came up with this method after making the other advent calendar that has the style of box where you've got the bottom and the lid that separate from each other. And I came up with this mostly because I just wanted to have a way to create a box that used an a standard letter size 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper a little bit more efficiently, because I was starting to run out of 12 by 12 just plain white cardstock, and since these bottoms need to be 5 3/4 by 5 3/4, you can really only get one out of each 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, and then you would have like a lot of leftover scraps or offcuts. And for advent calendars, when you need 24 boxes, that's gonna be a lot of scraps. And so this is what I came up with so that I could just use letter size paper and not have to get more 12 by 12 paper. So to start, you want a piece of cardstock that measures 8.5 by 5. So from one letter size sheet of paper, you can get 2 boxes. So I'm going to bring out my scoreboard and we're going to do some scoring. And really, I just came up with these dimensions because I wanted to just make the one cut. And so I used the full width, the full 8.5 by 11 or by 8.5, and then I just figured out, okay, how large of a box can I create using that width? And so this is what I came up with. My first score line is going to be at 1.5 inches. That's how deep our box is going to be. My next score line will be 2 inches from that line. So 1.5 plus 2 inches is going to be 3.5. And as I rotate this, I'll show you. So that was the depth. We just scored for basically the width of our box. Now we need to score the depth again. 1.5 from our previous score line, so that puts us at 5. Okay, so that was the side, the bottom, the side. Now we need the lid, and that'll be 2 inches. So 2 inches from our previous score line takes us to 7. And then we have just this little flap that folds in. That's the last 1.5. So now that we've got this scored, we need to score the other direction. So turn this 90 degrees, and we're going to score the depth. So 1.5. That's like that. And then add another 2 inches to that, so that takes us to 3.5. So the reason why I'm showing it to you like this is because you can change this up, and once you know this pattern, you can really make any dimension box that you want. So if you don't want it to be 1.5 inches deep, maybe you just want a more shallow box that's 1 inch deep, then you can just change up those measurements, because the pattern is essentially the for any square box, so the depth, the side, the depth, and then you just repeat that on the length ways as well. Depth, side, depth, side, depth. So that's everything scored. Now we need to make some cuts. If you have a paper trimmer, you could use a paper trimmer. You could cut this by hand if you wanted, but I just think that I prefer to just use I'm using my guillotine in this case, but a paper trimmer would work just as well. And I prefer that over hand cutting, because with hand cutting, you might just be like a little bit off, a little bit jaggy. So for the boxes to all look really uniform, I kind of prefer using something that is meant to do these really straight cuts. So on my guillotine, that's a little harder than just using one of those rotary kind of blade style trimmers, but it's still very possible. So what I'm going to do is I want to cut this first line, but only up until it hits the first score line. So I'm going to cut from this edge down until it hits the first score line, and I want to do that on both sides here. So I know that from this edge to here is 3.5 inches. So I'm going to actually line my paper up on the left edge to 3.5 inches. And then, because if you were to hand cut this on the score line, you could be like a fraction, this way or that way on the score line, because your score line is, not going to be exactly at where the same thickness. There's a little bit of thickness to it. So just depending on which side of the score line, or if you cut exactly in the middle or not, you're going to get a little bit of variability there. So I'm going to line the left edge to 3.5, and I'm going to pull my guillotine down until the blade hits the first score line. See? So you can bend it, and you can see if it didn't quite get to the score line, then I'll just maybe snip it just a fraction of a little bit the rest of the way. I'm going to turn my paper over, so I'm going to make the same cut, but from the back side. Going to line this up at 3.5 again. That should get me right in the center of my score line, and just trim it down till it hits the first score line that it intersects. So now we have 2 tabs here. We also have to make some cuts from the other side. So on the opposite end, on this end you want to actually cut until you hit 1, 2, the third score line. So you're going to be cutting all the way until the third score line. Basically, you're just going to have this one square that is not cut here. But you line it up the exact same. So, sorry, that hit my microphone. So I'm going to line the left edge to 3.5 and bring my guillotine trimmer all the way till it hits that third score line. Flip this over. Do the same thing. Line the left edge to the 3.5-inch mark. And trim it all the way to the third score line. Okay. Then there's bits of this that we can just cut away. And so on this side that you made the long cut, there's 3 sections on this cut. You can cut away the first 2 from this edge. So that what you'll be left with is just this tab. I'm going to turn that around and do the same thing on the opposite side. Just cut that away. So you're going to end up with something that looks like this. You've got the center square and some tab pieces and a long piece here. The last cut I'm going to make is I'm just going to trim off about 1/4 of an inch from this end here, the end that has this piece that hangs out. You could be precise and really measure 1/4 of an inch if you wanted, but that isn't absolutely necessary. All right, so that being done, I am also going to round the corners on this side. And one of the reasons why it's nice to actually use a trimmer to cut this instead of just snipping it by hand is because I do like to round the corners, and you'll get a better rounded corner if you have an exact 90-degree angle that you can push into your corner punch. So that, and this rounded corner here is the piece that is going to get tucked in. So it's a little bit easier to close your box with rounded corners just because it's a little smaller, and then can start, tucking it into the box a little bit more easily. At this point, while everything is nice and still flat, you could attach your decorative panel, and that's going to be, if I open this, that's going to be this piece right here. So we've got this shorter piece that we just rounded the corners of, and then this piece is going to be the top of our box. So if you wanted to just put a nice 2 by 2 inch square piece of pattern paper Now's a good time to do it while everything's nice and flat and you can give it a really good burnish. I'll just skip that for now, just so that we can move this along. But all you have to do now is just fold on all of your score lines and burnish along the way. Everything is a mountain fold. And when you're folding, just make sure all your lines are gonna, edges are lining up. Okay, so now that, I didn't fold this in. Let me get these last two edges folded and burnished. Okay, everything is burnished, folded and burnished, and I'm just gonna grab some double-sided adhesive. You might want to use your stronger adhesive here because this is actually holding your box together. And just depending on how long you want your advent calendar to last, if it's just for the season, it's not gonna get a lot of, a ton of wear and tear. If you plan to make a new one for next year, then regular double-sided adhesive is probably just fine. If you want it to last like year after year and be something that people keep and use as a tradition each Christmas, then maybe you want to use something a little stronger here. Or use liquid glue. That would be really good too. Liquid glue would actually be a really good option because that would also it would soak into the paper and it would give it some extra stability and not to mention a permanent bond. But I'm just going to use some double-sided. So I just have some double-sided adhesive on all 4 tabs, and there is some overlap here of the glue tabs, but I'm okay with that. You could trim these down if you wanted, but I actually prefer the overlap so that it does add that little bit of extra strength to your box. So now to put this together, I'm just going to remove the paper liner on my adhesive. And I'm going to keep this kind of bent a little bit. And I'm going to straighten up this one tab a little bit. It's a little wonky. Okay, sorry. And keeping this a little bit bent so that it doesn't make immediate contact with this tab, I'm going to just fold this up and then with my fingers just feel this corner and just make sure that everything is nice and flush. And then when it feels like everything's good and flush, then I'll press these 2 panels together so that the adhesive makes contact. And give it a really good burnish. And I'll do the same thing on the other side. So leave it so that it's at an angle so it doesn't make immediate contact. Feel for that corner, make sure it's nice and flush, and when it feels like it's in the right spot, go ahead and swing that panel over and burnish. So you see how now we've got a really flush line at the top, the sides, and it's all nice and even. Initially, when I was making the advent calendar that I showed earlier, I was just making those cuts by hand. And when it came time to put that strip of gold around the edges, I did notice some unevenness in the boxes. And so I then started to cut using the guillotine. And actually, what was really happening was just the scissors were giving me a little bit of a hand cramp. So that's actually why I started using the guillotine. But when I put everything together, I noticed that the boxes that were cut with the guillotine were sitting a lot more flush against each other, whereas my hand cut ones had some edges, poking up here and there. And you could always just go ahead and trim those, but if you've got your trimmer or your guillotine handy, for me anyways, it was a lot less stress cutting with the guillotine than cutting with my scissors. So that was also an added benefit. Alright, so our box is basically complete. So you can tuck that in and you've got a box with a lid. And so you could, depending on the purposes of what you need this for, you could just leave it at that, and this could be like a really nice little gift box. It's not completely closed because the edges, you can see, are open here. But it is a nice finished box. And then one of the reasons why I trimmed this down a little bit is just so that there's a little bit of give. It can go a little bit more into the box if needed. And I was also allowing for like any unevenness if it was hand cut. If you're using a trimmer, then maybe you don't need to do that, but it just makes everything fit a little bit nicer, and it looks a little bit nicer as well. If you're using this the way that I was using it as part of an advent calendar, and you want the little notch here, then what I use is, this is from ages and ages ago, 3/4 inch circle punch from EK Success. And all I do here is from my tab here, I'm just gonna slide this in. This is the other reason to cut off a little bit, because if you didn't cut off a little bit, at least for my hole punch, circle punch, this wouldn't be able to go in deep enough. But actually, as it is, this is just deep enough if I go in all the way. All I'm trying to do here is where this fold line is, I'm aiming to get that fold line into the center of my circle. And then I'm aiming to center the punch from side to side. So this just works perfectly if I push this all the way in, for my hole punch anyways. So once you've got that punched, then you have a nice little thumb notch, finger notch to pull this out from. And your advent calendar could, you can make it sit with this on the bottom, and then this is a thumb notch that lifts up. You can orient it whichever way you want. This could open like a door from the side, or the top, whatever feels more kind of natural to you, I guess. But there you have it. The second style of box that I created for my advent calendars. As a comparison between the two, this is a little bit smaller, even though it is 2 by 2, and this is designed to be 2 by 2, but it's because of all the extra layers of being cardstock folded on each other, it's actually more like 2 1/8 by 2 1/8 in terms of finished size. In terms of the inside box size, it is 2 by 2, so those measure the same. This box, with the lid attached, is a little bit deeper, and again, that was only so that I'm a little bit of a lazy crafter sometimes. It was just so that I could make the one cut out of a 8.5 by 11 sheet and be able to make this, and so it kind of maximizes an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. So a little bit of laziness, a little bit of frugality, just I don't want to generate a lot of scraps or a lot of waste. So, but you can always adjust that. You can make this to be, about an inch deep, which is what this is, whereas this box with the attached lid is an inch and a half. And then in terms of like sturdiness though, this is a much sturdier box. This box, you could make this a gift box and put a little bit of a treat in there, or this could be a little jewelry box, and it feels good. It feels kind of substantial. And if you are making an advent calendar that you do want to hold up over the years, I think this one will hold up better long term because it is more sturdy, but as well, there aren't any real stress points on the paper, whereas this style of box, for one, these sides is just one layer of cardstock. This is, and for this, I used 80-pound cardstock, whereas this I used 65-pound, but this is doubled up with all the folding at the end of the day. I put the extra tabs on the top and the bottom so that those two sides are a little bit more reinforced, because there's gonna be some friction when the lid goes into the top, and I just want all of that I want this to be a little bit stiffer so that it's easier to slot that in and have it feel a little bit more sturdy. But this is a working hinge here. So this is, each time it gets opened and closed, this paper, it has a stress point right here where it just continues to get exercised. And so over time, just, the one layer of cardstock that's being folded back and forth a lot, who knows how long that will hold up, right? So, but it is a stress point. It's not like it's gonna fall apart, after 2 or 3 times of opening and closing it. But like I was saying, if you want this to be something that gets stored and then gets, taken out each year, and lasts over time, or even if, maybe you have young kids who just aren't very precious about things, you don't have to necessarily be super dainty and delicate with working with this, but this is just sturdier overall, and there aren't any stress points to the cardstock, so it's gonna last longer, I think. So those are just a couple of considerations for which style that you prefer. In terms of pattern paper, you could certainly make this whole box out of pattern paper, and it would look really fantastic. But on my advent calendar, because I knew that I was covering all the rest of the edges, the only bit of pattern paper I needed was this 2x2-inch square. And that's a lot less pattern paper than needing a full 6x6 sheet. So that might be another consideration as well. And then lastly, this box came to life for me because I wanted to make efficient use of an 8.5x11 sheet of paper, because I was running out of 12x12s, and this style box, it's more efficient to use a 12x12 sheet to cut down plain cardstock for the bottoms. And so in terms of, being efficient with your paper use, and maybe the size of cardstock that you have on hand, if you only have 8.5x11 paper, maybe this is better. If you have a lot of 12x12s, and you don't mind the extra paper, making this style box might be a little bit nicer. So just a lot of trade-offs between the two. There's probably one other box design that is percolating on my mind, so if that does come to fruition, then I'll share that as well, and compare all of the boxes to one another, just so that you can get a pros con list of the different styles. So, thanks so much for joining me. I hope that this has been a fun video. Until my next one, stay safe, happy crafting, and have a fantastic day. Bye.